Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our December IPHA Town Hall. And as we have more people coming into the room, this is great. We're really appreciative of the turnout this evening. We know tonight's topic is of very much interest, and we're glad to have with us this evening Dr. Miranda Wilhelm, who's clinical professor at SIUE School of Pharmacy and is also IPHA's vice president. And we're proud to have her to help us go through all the ever-changing information about the COVID vaccine candidates coming forward. And so I will turn everything over to Miranda.
Thank you. Yes, and probably stuff has changed today that I didn't get to update the slides for. So if you guys know more information than I do, you're welcome to type it in the chat or we can share later some more information. So I just wanted to provide a little bit of an update since we talked about the vaccine at the October town hall meeting, and a lot of stuff has changed in between now and then. So just kind of an update on what we know. So I wanted to let everyone know that I don't have any conflicts of interest associated with this presentation. And then our pharmacist learning objectives, the main thing that I wanted to talk about was the different platforms. Since the mRNA vaccines are new and we don't have any currently on the market, I thought it'd be interesting to kind of talk about that piece. And then I also have a couple slides added about the effectiveness since the vaccines have all been releasing their efficacy data over the last couple of weeks. And the learning objectives for pharmacy technicians are the same. So we do have a pre-assessment question. Which of the following COVID-19 vaccines currently in phase 3 clinical trials uses an adenovirus, and the specific one is from the chimpanzee vector, to elicit the immune response? Is it A, the AstraZeneca University of Oxford vaccine, B, the Pfizer BioNTech vaccine, C, Moderna's vaccine, or D, Novavax vaccine? I can see mostly A's coming in through the chat, but a couple other letters snuck in there as well. So let's see how that turns out. All right, so kind of jumping into our topic about the COVID vaccines tonight. I first wanted to talk a little bit about Operation Warp Speed, since I feel like that title is pretty scary to pharmacists and patients alike. So Operation Warp Speed, abbreviated OWS, is a partnership between various federal government departments and agencies with private corporations being overseen by the Department of Health and Human Services, or HHS. The purpose of Operation Warp Speed is to develop, manufacture, and distribute 300 million doses of safe and effective COVID-19 vaccines. By the federal government investing and coordinating vaccine development, vaccines can be brought to market more rapidly while adhering to standards for safety and efficacy. The accelerated development occurs by aligning and overlapping safety and efficacy demonstration, which allows clinical trials to proceed more quickly. Steps in the FDA traditional vaccine development and approval process are not being omitted or eliminated, and I think that is a key part, but rather proceeding simultaneously. For example, phase 1, 2, and 3 clinical trials are being conducted concurrently rather than sequentially. Large-scale manufacturing of the most promising vaccine candidates is occurring while the clinical trials are being conducted to allow for faster distribution of an eventual vaccine rather than scaling up after FDA approval. This increases financial risk, but that's really what the federal government is taking the brunt of, but not the safety and efficacy of the vaccine. So globally, the World Health Organization has identified 48 vaccine candidates in clinical evaluation, consisting of phase 1 through 3 clinical trials. And actually this number may have gone up since I looked, because this is kind of a moving target as it changes every couple days. Another 164 vaccine candidates are in preclinical evaluation. The 48 vaccine candidates in development are utilizing different platforms, each with advantages and disadvantages. Some are easier to design, such as nucleic acid vaccines, while others, such as viral vector vaccines, may exhibit a better safety profile and be more immunogenic, but may have reduced efficacy due to pre-existing immunity to the vector itself. As these candidates advance into trials and production, a variety of products are expected to launch, which we're starting to see, giving patients maybe some choice regarding the most appropriate platform for them. In the US, more than 100 COVID-19 vaccine candidates are currently in development. From 14 initial candidates selected for review for Operation Warp Speed, 7, representing the most promising candidates, will go through further testing in clinical trials. To date, Operation Warp Speed has selected 5 vaccine candidates to fund for phase 3 clinical trials. And so those are the ones that I really wanted to focus on tonight. There are 5 vaccines that have been selected for Operation Warp Speed. I do want to draw your attention to a few components on this slide. So I have the candidate listed, and those are some of the kind of phase 1 and 2 names that you might see popping up in the literature. I've got the manufacturer, which I think we're all pretty familiar with those, and the vaccine platform, which we're going to talk about this evening. The schedule, most of these are doing a 2-dose series, but we do have one who's testing a single dose. All of them are using the intramuscular route at this point, and then storage, which I know has been a big concern for these different vaccines. And so I've got some updated information on the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccines with some of their excursion temperature requirements. So we know on Moderna's that it's supposed to be stored at -20 degrees Celsius. It looks like it's stable there for 6 months, and that it can be stored under refrigeration for 30 days. So some of these are starting to expand as they're kind of verifying the storage requirements. We know Pfizer's is the one with the -70, but they did show that it can be in that temperature plus or minus 10 degrees for 15 days, and then refrigeration for 5 days. You can look at kind of the rest of the refrigeration requirements. And then I want to point out with the Novavax vaccine, the very last one on this table, that this one was actually supposed to start phase 3 clinical trials in the US at the end of November. And from what I am researching, I'm not able to find that that actually started. So it did start clinical trials in the UK kind of in the mid of November, but I haven't seen any recent information about the phase 3 actually starting in the US. So that's one that hasn't been conducted at this time. So kind of moving into our vaccine platforms. The first one I wanted to talk about was the RNA vaccines. So both Moderna and the Pfizer BioNTech are messenger RNA, or mRNA, encapsulated in a lipid nanoparticle delivery system vaccine. And the reason for this is because mRNA is not stable by itself, it's rapidly degraded. And so they're encapsulating it in that lipid nanoparticle so that it can kind of stay until it reaches its site of action. mRNA vaccines are a novel approach, and to date have never been used in a commercially available vaccine to prevent infection. These will be our first 2. mRNA, if you remember from kind of immunology, mRNA is translated from DNA, and it provides the instructions for the production of proteins within the cell. For the COVID-19 vaccine, mRNA responsible for the coding of the SARS-CoV-2 surface spike protein, so that's that crown that we've heard a lot about, is introduced into the cell. And that's what we can see on the picture on the right-hand side. We see the vaccine encapsulated in that lipid nanoparticle entering the cell. When the vaccine enters cells inside the body, our body cells then use the mRNA to produce the surface spike protein of the coronavirus, which is the antigen. The body then produces antibodies against the protein, which then induces the immune response. So this is a way to get that mRNA into our own cells, and then our body produces the spike surface protein, which then we can produce antibodies to. So we're using our own body processes to make the vaccine basically for this disease. Our next one is the adenovirus vector. Both AstraZeneca, University of Oxford, and the Johnson & Johnson are using non-replicating adenovirus vector vaccines. AstraZeneca uses a chimpanzee adenovirus, and Johnson & Johnson is using a human adenovirus. And this one was actually recently approved by the European Commission, which is kind of like the FDA, for an Ebola virus vaccine. So we do have a vaccine currently on the European market that uses this platform. By using the same platform, the vaccine has a known and established safety profile. Adenoviruses are a group of viruses that cause the common cold. The chimpanzee adenovirus was selected because it is known to generate a strong immune response from one dose when used for other vaccines. It has been genetically modified such that it cannot replicate in humans. For the COVID-19 vaccine, researchers have inserted the gene for the SARS-CoV-2, again, surface spike protein, we're hearing a lot about that, into the chimpanzee adenovirus. When the vaccine enters cells inside the body, the cells use the genetic code to express the surface spike protein of the coronavirus. The body then produces antibodies against the protein, inducing an immune response and preparing the body to attack the coronavirus in the future if it infects the body. And so that's really what the picture on the right-hand side is showing. We've got the blue dot that represents the chimpanzee adenovirus that has been modified so that it cannot replicate. And then on the right-hand side, we see the SARS-CoV-2 virus where we have taken out the genetic material specific for the encoding of the spike protein, and then combine that with the chimpanzee adenovirus. And they're using that combination into the body. And then it kind of ends up doing the same thing that the mRNA vaccine that we just talked about, where your body produces the spike protein, and then you mount an immune response to that. The last technology is the protein vaccines, and this is actually the Novavax, which I said hasn't moved into phase 3 trials yet. But it is a recombinant nanoparticle vaccine containing a proprietary adjuvant, which is being called Matrix M. The vaccine uses recombinant DNA technology, where a modified SARS-CoV-2 surface spike protein is produced in a baculovirus insect cell expression system. And if you're thinking that sounds familiar, if you're familiar with FluBlock, this actually uses the same type of platform with the baculovirus insect cell expression system. So the vaccine exposes the immune system to the surface spike protein, inducing an immune response. And that's kind of what the picture shows here. But instead of just injecting the proteins themselves, which would be soluble in body fluids and tissues, and then your immune system is not likely to recognize that as foreign, they combine them into a nanoparticle, and that is going to be more apparent to the body to mount that immune response. In addition, they've added that adjuvant, which also helps to have the body recognize it as a foreign particle and mount that immune response. These protein-based or subunit vaccines work much like an inactivated vaccine by exposing the immune system to viral proteins and inducing protective immune response without causing disease. In the case of a protein-based vaccine, this is because no genes necessary for virus replication are included in the vaccine. So unlike the two that we just talked about, which are using the genes that translate the surface spike protein, this is actually giving you surface spike protein that's already been manufactured. All right, so moving into the part about the efficacy, since I know lots of patients and pharmacists are having questions about this because we've seen it in the news. The first one that was released was the Pfizer BioNTech phase 3 efficacy data. And so you can kind of see the information about the clinical trial, that it was randomized, placebo-controlled, et cetera, with an initial enrollment of 30,000 participants, but was expanded to 44,000 in September. And they are trying to have a diverse group of patients included. So on November 18th, they announced their vaccine efficacy at 95% at 7 days after the second dose. With this, they had 170 confirmed cases of COVID-19 that were evaluated. And I know they actually released a little bit sooner than this, their interim results, when they only had about 95 cases of COVID confirmed. So they've added cases to that. And of those 170 confirmed cases, 162 occurred in the placebo group and 8 occurred in the vaccine group. They also specifically did a sub-analysis for efficacy of adults 65 years and older, and that was found to be 94%, which is great. On November 20th, they filed the emergency use authorization with the FDA. And I do have listed kind of the doses that their manufacturing process anticipates being able to produce by the end of this year and next year. The Moderna information was released just this Monday. So this is kind of the newest information that we've got. It's actually called the COVE trial, and it's a similar randomized double-blind placebo-controlled. On November 30th, so on Monday, they announced their vaccine efficacy at 94.1%, 14 days after the second dose. And of that, they had 196 confirmed cases, of which 185 occurred in the placebo group and 11 occurred in the vaccine group. Another statistic that I would like to share is a secondary endpoint analyzed severe cases of COVID. And this included 30 cases, of which all of them occurred in the placebo group and none occurred in the vaccine group, which was excellent. Even if the vaccine doesn't prevent the patients from getting COVID, at least it's helping to reduce the severity of the disease, which is another benefit of vaccines that we usually talk about with patients. And November 30th, they also filed an emergency use authorization. I guess I should say I have heard that the Pfizer vaccine will be reviewed by the FDA on December 10th, and the Moderna is supposed to be reviewed on December 17th. Lastly, we have the AstraZeneca University of Oxford data, similar randomized double-blind placebo-controlled trial. And their interim analysis was released on November 23rd with an efficacy at 70%, 14 days after the second dose. And this was interesting because it was a lot lower, but remember, it's the adenovirus vector, not the mRNA, so a different platform is being used. But when we kind of took a closer look at the press release, it shows 90% efficacy when they did this half dose followed by a full dose 1 month apart. That was in only 2,000 plus patients. And then we saw 62% efficacy with 2 full doses are given 1 month apart. And that was in more than 8,000 patients. So these efficacy numbers, I'm not sure if they're telling the whole story because of the number of patients that were included. The higher efficacy is in the smaller number of patients, and as we know, that may not extrapolate out as we get larger and larger numbers of patients involved. The other thing that was interesting is the number of confirmed cases of COVID. They had 131, but nowhere could I find, at least in the press release, where they said how many cases were in the placebo group versus the vaccine group. So that information is still kind of yet to be released to the public. So keep your eye open for more information as they, and this was just their interim analysis. As they release the full data, we'll kind of have to compare that and see how things change. All right, so in summary, there are currently 4 COVID vaccines in phase 3 clinical trials, and actually some of them are moving out of phase 3 into the EUA process. 2 of them are using an RNA platform. 2 of them are using a non-replicating viral vector platform. And both of the Pfizer and the Moderna have filed for the emergency use authorization with the FDA. All right, so then moving into our post-assessment question, let's see how we did. Which of the following COVID-19 vaccines currently in phase 3 clinical trials uses an adenovirus chimpanzee, specifically vector, to elicit the immune response? Is it A, AstraZeneca, Oxford, B, BioNTech, Pfizer, C, Moderna, or D, Novavax? I can see you guys are putting your answers in the chat, which is great. I see lots of A's. That is the correct answer, so good job. All right, and then just some resources and references. I did provide, the first one here is a vaccine tracker, and it's really interesting. It talks about where each vaccine is in the clinical trial process, and if there's been studies published, it links you to them. So that's been great to find data on the phase 1, phase 2, and then there isn't really much other than press releases about the phase 3 trials at this point. And then yesterday, the ACIP had its emergency meeting for discussing the ethical principles of allocating the initial supplies of COVID vaccine, and I provided a link to the ACIP website for that information. There's also other COVID specific and Operation Warp Speed specific websites as well. All right, so I can do my best to try to answer the questions, but I would also open it up to everyone because I'm sure that lots of people know just as much information about this as I do. And so I would be happy if people have data to kind of chime in with whatever they know. So starting from the bottom of the questions, I see Chad's question about the ACIP making a recommendation, and they actually did vote yesterday. And the vote ended up being very similar to what the National Academies of Science and Engineering and Medicine, with like the 1A, 1B being 1A, healthcare workers who have direct patient care. I think that is a key piece. And then the second was long-term care residents and staff there.
Dennis, I see your hand up. Go ahead and unmute.
Yes, for those patients that they're always concerned about receiving live viral vaccines, I would assume there is no issue with any of the vaccines that are going to be available.
So all of these 3 different platforms that we talked about tonight, none of them are a live virus vaccine. They're all what would be considered like an inactivated vaccine. There are some in other countries that are being developed that are live attenuated vaccine, but none of these are.
And that's a question I know we'll get, so thank you.
That's great. I actually had that question earlier today.
Abby, go right ahead.
Very much, and I appreciate your presentation, Miranda. I'm just gonna actually ask a question about how would you see our role as pharmacists in community settings specifically, and student pharmacists we can play in the education part in addition to the immunizer and advocates. I know that we've had some issues in the past with some myth about vaccines, but I think this is the pandemic of the century. We don't have the luxury to wait until people make up their mind about taking the vaccine or not. So I would love your advice on that.
Oh, great. I think that is a really important part. I know just on social media, I'm seeing people like, I'm the pharmacist and I don't want to get that vaccine. It sounds too rushed. And so I can imagine that patients without the scientific knowledge that we have to be able to understand the data that's been presented, that it's going to be very scary for them. So I think our role of education is going to be really important. And so I think when patients come up and say, like, are you going to get this? I would say yes, because we know that the herd immunity needs most people to get the vaccine for it to be effective. And so I think we need to really work hard to educate our patients in how this is not speeded. It's been done faster than usual, but that it was still safe and effective. I think that's why I wanted to talk about how Operation Warp Speed is occurring so that we understand the name is scarier than really what's going on. And I know there is going to be a lot of vaccine hesitancy related to this. I mean, I think healthcare providers are also going to experience vaccine hesitancy. And so I think that is a great role for us to talk about, like, here's what it did. It did make things go faster, but safety and efficacy were not decreased in any way. The FDA is still following their same procedures that they always do. And so we should not be afraid of these vaccines.
Miranda, you had a couple questions in the chat. Going back, Cody was asking, have the actual studies been released yet to the public or just the results? He had a provider ask him for the studies today.
That's a great question. So far for the phase 3, there have been no studies published. It's all press releases at this point. So we're just getting the information from the manufacturer. So until we have peer review, I mean, I think we need to at least mentally question the results until we can see them ourselves and verify that this is true. But I think with the Operation Warp Speed and using the government agencies, it's probably correct information that's coming through. I saw Chris Herndon's question about incidence of side effects, and I think this goes along with Abby's point as well about like what should we educate our patients about. And so from the press releases, at least so far, the side effects are not looking that bad. But then when the ACIP met yesterday, there was this discussion about maybe not vaccinating everybody in the floor at the same time in case people have to stay home for a day or two. And so there is kind of this concern that patients may really have a potential side effect that could make them really tired or could have a headache or something. When you look at the results, the side effects that they're discussing are exactly what you would anticipate. Injection site reactions is the most common for every vaccine. And then the other ones that we would anticipate a low percentage are, muscle aches, headache, those kind of things, low-grade fever, all the things that we typically expect with vaccines. So far, I'm not seeing these like scary side effects coming through other than people are kind of like, what if, and talking about it. But the results have not been sharing that kind of side effect profile. Low incidence of the grade 2 and 3 side effects. Oh, the chat is like blowing up.
Yeah, you've got some really great questions. Ohm's got a question here. Why do we have to wait till December 10th and I guess December 17th for the FDA to meet? Why can't they have an emergency meeting to approve?
I know for one part, the FDA, in addition to their internal experts that are going to review the data, they're also going to have an external panel. And I'm assuming that that is some of the time that these experts are going to have to be convened and then give them time to review all the data. And the protocols for these things are like hundreds of pages long. So I'm sure the data is a lot to review for them. So I'm assuming that's why we need that extra time for them to be able to have an independent panel of experts review the data in addition to the FDA staff.
Alex had a question about, where'd it go? That's how they were able to produce the, I guess she was responding to a question. Never mind.
I've got Julie's question up about immunocompromised patients and populations on biologics, which I think is a great question. I do know that a lot of the clinical trials are allowing patients who have immunosuppressed status, like HIV and other medical conditions, have been included in the populations as long as their condition was stable. So they have at least looked at some. I'm not sure about the patients on like tumor necrosis factor alpha and other biologics of that nature, but I do know that some of the immunocompromised patients have been included, which I think is great for that.
Great, thanks, Miranda.
Miranda, you had a question here about the mechanism of action, about the mRNA vaccine that's injected is fixed. How long does the body continue to produce virus protein from the mRNA? When is the mRNA completely eliminated from the body?
That's a great question. I don't have any data on like the half-life of any of that stuff, but I think it would follow the normal immune process. So the body is going to kind of keep using that mRNA to make it until the immune system can attack and kill all of those cells. And so it's, kind of that peak efficacy usually takes about 2 weeks. So I think it's kind of going to be in that time frame where the memory cells are produced and a lot of that. That's a little more immunology than I am prepared to present. I think it's going to follow that same process.
Garth, you should tease the spot
Well, yeah, I'll be talking about that. Miranda, you got another good question here, and then we'll tease our podcast here in a minute. The vaccines are only viable for 15 days at -70. How cold are the vaccines being stored before that? And then are they still viable while stored so long? And he just used one of the vaccines for an example.
Say the storage has been one of the hardest parts. I actually read all three, the Moderna, the Pfizer, and the Johnson & Johnson protocols. And nowhere in the protocol does it say anything about storage. So that has been like leaked and then not very hard to find. So there have been press releases from the manufacturer, and that's been the only way that I've been able to find some of that data. And I'm not sure if honestly they know how long it's good, since we basically started on this vaccine where they made the DNA, they did the genome in like February, and then we are now in December and we've gotten the vaccine. So I don't know if they even truly know how long it's good at any of the storage temperatures. I think more data is going to come out on that, kind of the longer that we have it available. I think Starlin's helping answer some questions.
Right, and it says some of the questions are still coming in. I just want to let tease for everyone for later in the week. Ben and I just recorded an interview actually just a couple hours ago with Dr. Stephen Foster. And that name should ring a bell to some of you, especially in the immunization world. He is a retired public health service captain and has been pharmacy's representative on ACIP since I think 2001. And it's basically helped craft IPHA's immunization program and the approach that we all use every day. So we were fortunate enough to have him on, and he gave some detailed interview on the ACIP process and a lot of the ins and outs of how we need to be looking at this vaccine approval process and being able to be supportive for our patients. And most importantly, one thing that we need to keep in mind is we need to be looking at the whole patient. So also looking at all their other vaccine needs at the same time as we have them in. So there's a lot to be thinking about as we go forward. And just to tease that interview just a little bit, that'll be out later this week. Any other questions? Phil, you've got your hand raised. Go right ahead and unmute yourself.
To Miranda in her private chat, I put it there, so I don't know if she's seen that or not.
Okay, the chat like blew up for me, so I have not been able to scroll through there. I'll try to do that like as the rest of the presentation
No
goes
problem,
on.
thank you.
I see that you're unmuted. Did you have a comment?
Yes. Miranda, patients who were COVID positive and they survived, where do they stand as far as vaccine is concerned? Do they need to get vaccine or no? Or if they do, they will be probably on the bottom, right?
I was going to say, I think they're definitely going to want to get the vaccine because we're seeing that some patients can get it twice. And so we're not 100% sure how long, if you have the disease, your protection lasts. I agree they're probably not the number one group of people because hopefully they have some immunity remaining. So I don't think they're going to be in phase 1 unless they're a healthcare worker, and then they probably will get the vaccine in phase 1. Otherwise, I think those patients could be a little bit further down on the list, but we definitely have incidents of COVID twice. So I think we're going to need to make sure they get the vaccine as well.
Thank you, Om. Chad, I see that you're unmuted. Go ahead with your question.
Thanks for the presentation, Miranda and Garth, for putting this together. So originally I saw something about like a card being put in there that the patients are supposed to keep track of to know which one they got. I know then also I heard some talk about some sort of national way to keep track of this. I'm crossing my fingers that's the first steps of a national registry. I know Illinois has gotten better and more useful. What's the latest on tracking this, and so the patients know which one they got and when? And because I also heard if you get one, you have to get the exact same manufacturer for the second dose, which makes sense based on the way.
Yes. I haven't heard anything about a national registry. I thought we were running it through all the states individually. So if anybody else knows more information about that, please speak up.
If you get it through the state allocation, which most of us on this call will probably be getting it through a state allocation, we'll be reporting to ICare. If you're part of the Walgreens CVS initiative, or if your pharmacy was selected with the long-term care facility immunization phase, you'll actually be reporting into a federal registry directly to the CDC. And we're hoping, from what we're being told, that data is going to be exchanged back down to the states so that we have a fluid process. One of the things that I also believed, and this isn't more for tracking for the actual vaccinations, but I know for adverse event reporting, they were talking about that there's going to be an app available, I believe called vSafe, that will be in addition to VAERS, that will allow the patients to be able to report things directly to the CDC. Stephanie, I see that you have your hand up. Go right ahead.
Yeah, just along those lines, I don't know how many of you were certified as yellow fever vaccinators, but when I was immunizing for yellow fever, they had that yellow card, and that provided information that you could carry with you. But the other concern I have is with the batch. Let's say that it was a bad batch. Are we going to be able to make sure that there's opportunities for any type of recalls or unstable batches to be located for any risk mitigation on the back end?
I mean, I think they're going to have to follow that. Generally speaking, there's not necessarily bad batches of vaccines because they're made in different quantities. And so it's hard to say that, like, if one has a lot more side effects, maybe there were millions of doses out of that. And so it's kind of an equally proportioned number of side effects. But I do think, they're going to have to keep track of lot and expiration, just like you do with any vaccine that you give the documentation, and follow those same procedures.
Mm-hmm. And then, like I said, with yellow fever, they did, patients had a card. I don't know if you guys were immunizers for yellow fever, but it would be good if patients had some type of record like that.
Yes, and providing your patients with the vaccine record is always encouraged. So we don't necessarily do a great job of that with flu, but it's always encouraged that patients have that information.
That's what concerns me, is because I see what has happened with flu, and then if we're going to now put responsibility on the technicians, I can see there being a lot of gaps. Just saying.
Ben, I see your hand is raised and muted.
Yeah, so in part of the CDC's initial supplies that they're going to be sending out to all the pharmacies, in that is cards that we are going to be required to give. And as well, going back to the lot and expiration data, that is part of the ICare system, that when we register with ICare, we get the batches in, we're supposed to log that as our inventory within ICare, so that when we're giving those shots, we take out of our inventory and into the shot screen for that patient. So all that is reported both to the state registry and nationally. And yes, they will all get that card as part of the requirement.
Thanks.
Dennis, go right ahead, and then we've got a couple more questions in the chat.
Okay, just to clarify, the reason for the 2-week delay, it's been reported that, as you probably would guess, the amount of data that has to be reviewed is huge compared to that was gleaned by the manufacturer and initially submitted. The second thing is, even though you've heard this week that the product has been released in England, that's because, again, their review process is much more less intensive than our FDA. The last thing is, for those people that are immunocompromised, might not be a bad idea, and I would check with your physician about this, and that is that you may want to get a blood workup and see what the level is of your white blood cell count prior to getting any vaccine. End of story. Thank you.
All right, thank you for all the questions, everyone, and your participation. That was great.
Miranda, we got a couple more questions here for you. One's from Bob about how many incidents of reinfection with COVID have there been and where have they occurred?
I know of several personal friends who have been infected at least twice. So I don't know if there has been any report that is actually published so this is more personal experience. But they have been healthcare workers that have tested positive and then couldn't go back quarantined, and then their sites are testing weekly all the employees, and they came up and tested positive again and had to quarantine. So I don't know if there's actual statistics published on that.
And then it looks like on our last question, generally how long do the majority of patients test positive for COVID even after their first positive result?
I think Starlin answered that.
She
7
did
to 14 days.
And Bruce, I really like your suggestion here. Have the patient take a picture of their card with their phone so they have it with them all the time. That's a great suggestion. Any other comments or questions for Miranda before we shift gears here and give you guys your CE code and then proceed with the other material for tonight? Let's review the national data and then we'll go through Illinois as well, as we've had in previous meetings. We've got 64 million global cases with just under 14 million cases in the United States. And as we know, our cases in the United States are going to continue to increase as we see the fallout from the Thanksgiving holiday. Positively, we've seen over 41 million cases worldwide have recovered, and just over 5 million cases have been here in the United States. But we do need to continue to be vigilant as we see with not everyone having practiced a safe holiday over Thanksgiving. And as we have many holiday celebrations coming up in the number of weeks, that we need to remain social distanced and wear masks and utilize meeting environments like this with Zoom or FaceTime or whatever is your preference, Google Duo, just to help with facilitating a safe celebration, because the last thing we want is to infect others. And I know that a lot of you are practicing that, but I think we need to remind our staffs of that as well. As we know, the state of Illinois is in tier 3 mitigations in all regions. The only regions that are close to getting out are region 3, which is the Quincy to Springfield region, and the city of Chicago. But I doubt that will be changed anytime soon. The governor has announced that there's actually going to be tier 3 for the next couple of weeks. I think that's prudent because I think this is going to be, the lack of a better phrase, the calm before the bigger storm. And we've already seen extreme stresses on the Illinois healthcare system. If we look at Metro East area, we're already in a significant deficit of ICU and med surgical beds. And this is very concerning because with the neighboring metropolitan area of St. Louis is already in diversion, and in some cases and overloaded with the number of cases that they're experiencing. And I know a lot of our border communities also in the Chicago area are seeing similar issues going on. So all regions of the state are in a deficit of either ICU beds or med surg beds or both. So we definitely need to continue to be vigilant. Our positivity in most regions is going down, some better than others. So it is working. But again, we're in this phase of the calm again between a new increase after Thanksgiving. And I hope that, I hope we're wrong. I hope it doesn't end up being as bad as we think. but I know we'll get through it. We've gotten through worse periods before, but do just continue to look at your practices. We do know that some practices are having problems with staff being sick, so please feel free to reach out to IPHA staff to obtain pharmacists lists for relief technicians, students, and pharmacists. I want to spend some time tonight looking over COVID vaccine preparation steps. Again, I've included the information here. These are basic steps that you need to do. It may not be everything that you may need to do, but we want to make sure that you're doing these basics. I want to include the immunization coordinator, Gina Lathan, her information here, and the ICare help desk emails in case you do need those. But you should have received an email a couple weeks ago from Department of Financial and Professional Regulation asking you to sign into Siren. And Siren is the Department of Public Health's healthcare provider alert network, and it's mainly was used for hospitals and physicians, but IPHA lobbied hard with public health to have pharmacists added to that back starting in the spring, and we're glad to see that pharmacists are now part of this. And so when you do sign up for this, do make sure you select both all pharmacists and COVID-19 mass vaccination providers. In addition, hopefully, we've been working on this for the past couple of years with our community pharmacists and local health department partner program, is trying to get pharmacists to be part of Illinois Helps. Illinois Helps is, again, public health's volunteer management program. So that's also for healthcare providers and the general public. And so this is mainly through the Medical Reserve Corps. And we want you to, again, sign up for the pharmacy statewide MRC or Medical Reserve Corps. And that should say county, not country, but your county Medical Reserve Corps. And so almost every county has a Medical Reserve Corps, and some municipalities, specifically up in the Chicagoland area, have their own MRCs, like the city of Chicago. And I know, as an example, Skokie has its own Medical Reserve Corps. And then the big part here, we want you to get signed up for ICare. If you haven't done it, do that tonight. Make sure you sign up for ICare because it's going to take you 4 to 6 weeks. We've been talking about it for a number of months, and I know a lot of you have done through the hard work of getting signed up. So please, it doesn't take too long to fill these forms out, but you do need to make sure you sign up for the web portal registration, your individual provider agreement, and then your overall pharmacy provider agreement. Now, if you are a pharmacist who's an employee pharmacist, you on your web portal registration, you'll have to search for your pharmacy where you can link up, and then that person will approve you. But if you're a pharmacy owner filling out that, make sure that you may have to put in, I believe it's dph.security as the pharmacy default or the provider default. And then they'll reach out to help coordinate your provider registration. I also put a link in here to the state's mass vaccination planning guide. This is still technically a draft, even though I know it's been released to the public, but it gives you at least the basics of where the state is, at least when this was submitted back in October. The federal HHS has asked that all pharmacies be part of Vaccine Finder and Med Finder. So please do make sure you go on and register your pharmacy. This will help with making sure that when interfaces with other search engines, that patients will be able to find pharmacies that have COVID vaccine. And then please do look at any of your wholesaler or PSAO agreements and forms. I know those, it's very general here, but I know everyone's taking a little different approach. And if you have not filled out the CDC vaccine provider form, please do make sure that you've submitted that as well. I know these are going to be a lot. This is a lot of different steps, and this is what we need you to sign up for right now. As we'll say, as we said earlier, a lot of this stuff is very fluid, so there may be additional requirements as we go forward. IPHA today was asked to be on in a meeting with the governor's office on this Friday to talk with DPH specifically about the rollout plan. So we will probably have a lot more information then. I know through a national level, through NASPA, Pfizer has coordinated a call that's going to be, I believe, Monday or Tuesday next week to talk specifically about their vaccine candidate and prior to the FDA review on December 10th. Remember, it still has to have, even when the FDA submits their EUA, ACIP still has to provide a recommendation before it can be deployed. And that doesn't mean, as you know, you see in the press, and we've shared articles, that Pfizer is already putting the chess pieces into play and has been moving the vaccine around the country so that it's ready to go. But it does have to have the EUA approval and the ACIP recommendation before administrations can take place. So please do, for those that are in a chain environment, please make sure to continue to work through your corporate informations on how to handle your company policies in relation to COVID, especially with those with Walgreens and CVS, because as I said earlier, yours may be more in a federal, from a federal point of view instead of the state point of view. So please do follow the directives that are coming down via your corporate processes. Well, I know we've shared a lot of information, and I know we may not have answered everyone's questions, but we wanted to make sure that we gave you as much as we can. And a lot of this, changed, as Miranda said, Monday, Tuesday, and even today. So a lot of this is brand new information. So please do take a look at this with the vaccine preparation steps again. Make sure that you've signed up for Siren, Illinois Helps, and ICare, at least on a state level, and make sure that you're all ready to go. So when we get here in the coming weeks, that we can best handle and help the citizens of the state. Scott's asking, anything new on technician vaccine, or our tech did a training with Washington State? Will that be recognized by Illinois? If they did the program that was with Washington State University, and if you want to send me more information about exactly which program, more than likely that is the approved program. The Board of Pharmacy has not voted on any specific recommendation, but way back in February, we made a recommendation, and it was at least agreed to, and then the discussions, that whatever program should be formatted similar to the approved program for APHA's immunization program, which has been a long standard for pharmacists and student pharmacists. And they agreed that it should at least be it needs to be at least an ACPE accredited program. They haven't named specific programs, but IPHA is a licensed partner for the APHA Pharmacy Technician Immunization Program. Miranda and I will at least going to be the first trainers on this initially. I know we'll need more trainers as we go forward. We've been working on ways of trying to help with the skills assessments, and we've did some tests of a new way of doing those assessments in November with a lot of our pharmacists. And so we will be holding multiple training sessions in the coming months for at least technicians. We may do another one for pharmacists if we get enough. I know we just held one in November in coordination with APHA. But as always, right after we hold any training program, we get people asking about that training program. So we've already had a number of people ask about an upcoming, if we're going to be doing another pharmacist immunization program. So if for some reason any of you on the call have not completed your immunization training, or if you have, need to double check your CPR and make sure that your CPR is up to date. Those are getting a little bit harder to get renewed or initialized right now, again, because of the lack of meeting in person. Some places are still holding in-person classes for CPR, so please do take a look at that and make sure that you're keeping yourself up to date and not missing anything. I know earlier in COVID, during the pandemic, that the American Red Cross and the American Heart Association extended some expiration dates, but I have not seen an update to expiration extensions. So please do take a look at that. We're hitting right at the top of the hour. So does anyone have any questions or comments? Chad's asking, do we need a collaborative practice agreement or standing order to give COVID? No, you do not. Because of the federal HHS expansion of scope of practice, pharmacists can independently write for the COVID vaccines. And even though the State Board of Pharmacy has not, or the governor's office have not issued a state level proclamation, we have asked for that, and that'll be a part of our discussions on Friday, because we would like to have at least a state level declaration similar to the COVID testing as it was done back in April to mirror the federal HHS expansions. Bedrea is asking about how would that play out with payments. Really, the payments are supposed to be recognized from what NASPA and APHA have discussed. There's been a lot of agreements on that there at least be an administrative fee. Of course, you won't be paying for the vaccine, at least initially. And that insurers and Medicare and Medicaid are supposed to recognize those. And that's going to be also a discussion with the governor's office for Friday. Specifically in particular to Medicaid, because Medicaid, specifically the pediatric population, has traditionally only recognized VFC providers. And HHS federally has stated that pharmacists, in relation to this expansion of scope and for COVID, do not have to be VFC providers to be recognized. So that's still a discussion point that's still out there on the table. Great questions. How are LTC pharmacies hearing from the state when they're getting allocations for vaccines? That's one thing that's going to be, again, a discussion point on the rollout, because again, in this phase 1A, most of this is going to be through federal allocation. And so those will be to Walgreens, CVS, and those pharmacies who met the requirements for being eligible in the very first phases. So those will be through federal allocations directly from McKesson. But we're not sure exactly how the state's going to work yet. We do know it's going to be administered through ICare, that you'll be ordering through ICare. But that is one of the questions I have about whether it's going to be coming from McKesson to the local health departments, then to the pharmacies, or how that's actually going to roll out just yet. There was a question about the administrative fee amount. That's been a range. I've heard everything between $8 to $15. So that's still kind of in discussions on a federal level. All right, everyone. Well, this is, our normal monthly town hall, so we wouldn't have another one scheduled until January. But depending on the amount of information and how things may be changing as the COVID vaccine rolls out, we may have another town hall later in the month. So just keep an eye out for the farm flashes and other communications from the association on this. And as always, do not hesitate to call the office or email me, and we can help try to address your questions as we go forward. We're here to help you out. And if we don't know the answer, we'll try to get the answer for you. It's going to be a very fluid situation, and we appreciate everyone's patience in advance as we start to address this and get everybody prepped and ready to go. Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening.
Thanks, Garth.
Thank you.